I'm going to start here. I don't know how much you guys know of the whole listing process and all of that, but I think more people tend to be interested in not how it got listed, but now what happens now that it is. So I'm going to kind of start in the middle of the story. And if anybody wants to go back to the beginning, I can wax philosophic about that too. So about the time I came on board at EPA, actually in June of 2020, we granted the final notices. We did our final granting of the notices that two people, the HSIA, the Halogenated Solvent Industry Alliance, and New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, both petitioned EPA to add 1BP. Those petitions were granted in 2020, but the HAP wasn't listed at that point. And that's because although we have listed, delisted, removed many substances from the HAP list, we've done 4 different removals, we've never listed before. So we wanted to take a minute to step back and say, what happens when you list a compound? We had a lack of information on some of the uses. We had heard rumors about, and seen some reports of uses of 1BP. We work with pretty often with the people at TSCA who are also studying 1BP. We decided to send out an advance notice of proposed rulemaking in June of 2021. And that notice asked for different types of regulatory impacts that happen, when you list a HAP, what happens? Around that time, we started realizing that there were really kind of 2 parts to this whole deal. The actual listing of 1BP, adding it to the HAP list, and all of the stuff that we might have to change in the general provisions to explain what happens if you list it. So we split it into 2 parts of a project, eventually 2 completely separate projects. The addition of 1BP finished on its merry way. It was listed in January of 2022. As of February 4th, 2022, we have a brand new HAP. I'm going to talk a little bit in a minute about what that means. What I'm not going to be able to talk about a whole lot today is this other part, the proposed infrastructure. There may be a time down the road where we can talk a little bit more about it, but it will answer all of the questions, we hope, on what happens when you list a new HAP. Right now, we are only kind of answering a lot of questions, but not all of the questions. So that infrastructure rule is going to get proposed sometime this spring or summer, and then we'll have a final infrastructure. Now, I will go back up just for a second and say our original plan was to do this infrastructure first, so that 1BP wasn't kind of left hanging out there without an infrastructure. So there are some things that we have come out and said, and that is on this next slide. This stuff on this slide comes from mostly from a guidance manual, a question and answer document that we published on the same day that the notice was in the Federal Register. This is online on the 1BP webpage, and there's a link or a address to that I can give you guys, or I can just send it to Mark and he can forward it if no one has this document. But we published a document that answered some of those burning questions, the ones we could answer right now. And one of the biggest ones is that no NESHAP promulgated before February 4th of 2022 includes 1BP. If you read the ANPRM that we put out in 2021, we kind of hinted that maybe it might, because there are a lot of terms in a lot of NESHAP that say things like total HAP standards. So you would think if we add another HAP, it would be part of that total HAP. But what the lawyers have told us is the Clean Air Act doesn't allow that. Before we can include a new HAP in that total HAP limit, we have to look specifically at that HAP and either confirm it belongs there or set its own standard. So no NESHAP promulgated before February 4th includes 1BP. So that's all NESHAP. No NESHAP includes it. So that takes out a whole bunch of people who might have been impacted by this rule. What does happen or did happen on February 4th is that it became a HAP, and that triggers some requirements. You have to include 1BP in all of your HAP emission estimates, including your potential to emit, and this could result in you becoming, or a facility becoming, a major source of HAP. So here are the people who are impacted: someone who's currently an area source and becomes a major source. The most obvious way is that you use 10 tons or more or emit 10 tons or more of 1BP. But there could also be people who are bumping up against that 25 tons of total HAP, and their 2, 3, 4, whatever tons of 1BP might kick them over into the major source. So those are the people who have to do something, because 1BP is not regulated in any NESHAP, but if you become a major HAP source, there's 114, 115 some odd NESHAP that apply to major sources, and you could potentially be impacted by any one of them. So that's really the bottom line of right now, who has to pay extra attention. Everybody has to include 1BP as they're moving in their permit applications and their inventories. They probably have to, or most states will require them to be in your HAP emission estimates. But the people moving from area to major are the big hitters. And again, okay, so one of the questions I'm asked often is, when will the rules include 1BP? And that answer is eventually. When every rule is required to go through an 8-year review, on the very next time any rule goes through this 8-year review, the inclusion of 1BP will be considered. What I cannot tell you well right now is whether any rule is going to get moved up in the priority list because of 1BP. In all probability, halogenated solvent cleaning. Most of 1BP is used in halogenated solvent cleaning. So it is getting a spotlight on it right now, as, you know, should we be moving this rule up the line of who's going to get regulated first, so that we can add 1BP into halogenated solvent cleaning. All of the other rules, it's also used in coatings, surface coatings. A lot of our coatings rules include cleaning operations like wipe cleaning and gun cleaning and things like that, that could potentially be 1BP. That's down the road. That's down here in this pink box, if you can see it. The ongoing emissions evaluation of the Part 63 NESHAP categories. The other thing I wanted to do is just kind of go through the question and answer document. This is really where the rubber hits the road. Since 1BP predates the infrastructure rulemaking, we developed this document to answer some of the questions. Like I said, there are some questions that are not answered in this document, and we're aware of that, and we're working on it. But it was designed to provide guidance to everybody out there about who, what to do, or who is affected how. And a couple of them are even things that didn't change, just to clarify that some things didn't change. And I'm going to just kind of go through, I'm not going to read these, I won't bore you with these, but we can come back to them if anyone has any questions. There are basically 4 categories of questions in this document. When does 1BP become a listed HAP? These are the emission calculation ones. And as we said, we've been public on this one. It happens on February 4th. It happened on February 4th, and you have to include it in your PTE. The next group of questions were about Title V permitting. What happens if you become a major source? We didn't change Title V. There's nothing that with the listing of 1BP that changed Title V. It's still the same way it always was. If you become a major source of HAP and you are required to apply for a permit, you have 12 months to do that. Didn't change anything, but we have some questions in there about that because we get a lot of questions about Title V. NESHAP applicability. Question number 6 is, to me, the biggest one that we put out there, and different from what you might have read in the ANPRM. All current NESHAP do not include 1BP. That's very, very important. So if you are a facility that goes from area to major, you might, for example, trigger the Boiler Act for major sources. You might trigger a coatings rule for major sources. That coatings rule might have a total HAP standard. You have to comply with that HAP standard. You just don't include 1BP in the calculation yet. So it's a little squirrely, those people that are caught in the 1BP going area to major. Again, we think that those numbers in the tens. I was asked on a conference last week, do I think it's in the tens, hundreds, or thousands? I think it's in the tens. I don't think there are a whole bunch of people that are going to trigger major source because of 1BP. It's going to be people who switched probably to 1BP for halogenated solvent cleaning to get out of the halogenated solvent cleaning NESHAP. We know that about 90 people use enough 1BP, so they use more than 10,000 pounds, that they have to report to TRI. Not all of them emit major source levels by themselves, but again, it could add up to that 25. And then there are going to be a lot of people who use 1BP in much smaller quantities, and it's probably not going to change their source classification. So these go through some of the questions on the NESHAP applicability. And then there's a question on enforcement. You know, the enforcement, it's there. Will they take enforcement action? The biggest thing that the enforcement people said last week is, if you are one of these people who are truly impacted by the listing of 1BP, you need to reach out to your states, to your regions, and we need to identify the questions that need to be answered for you. So I'm going to leave it at that and see if you guys have any other questions. That's the website, but clearly without this website, I mean, without my presentation, you can't click on that link. But I can send it to anybody who wants it. But that document is really critical. And as we move forward, we're going to be answering those theoretical questions, the ones that aren't real life 1BP questions. We're going to be trying to answer them for in the infrastructure for any future HAP listings. You know, you hear rumors of PFOA and PFAS possibly getting listed, but there could be other HAPs down there. There are some people speculating that 1BP listing will open the floodgates of listing. We haven't seen that yet. There's no other active listing operation going on right now. All right, I'm going to stop talking and let you guys talk. Ask me questions.
Susan, Tony Pendola put in the chat box.
Oh, yeah, I can't see the chat.
Oh, you see that? Yeah.
Oh, I see it now. Might subpart M address 1BP since it's proposed but not yet finalized? I don't know. Everything we're hearing about dry cleaning in 1BP is that it doesn't exist anymore. The equipment stopped being sold for dry cleaning. There used to be the main supplier of 1BP used to make dry cleaners equipment that could be using 1BP. I don't think that was without its problems. They stopped selling it maybe 5 or 6 years ago, and they believed that all dry cleaning usage would be gone by 2020. Now, in reality, you can buy 1BP over the internet. So there's the possibility of some mom and pops or something buying it straight off the internet. I don't know. If anyone is aware of a dry cleaner, I would reach out to the dry cleaning lead engineer and tell them that, because everything we're hearing is 1BP is not used in dry cleaning. Yeah, thank you.
Any other questions?
No? Well, if anybody has any, or if anybody hears any, please send them in. I really, really believe that reaching out with you guys and hearing the real, you know, boots on the ground perspective on where we're right and where we're wrong on the assumptions that we're making and the questions we need to answer will help make this infrastructure future project that's coming out better, and will also help us identify any needs for 1BP.
Well, thank you, Susan, for your presentation. And if, you know, as you expressed in your presentation, if you think of things that, you know, augment what you've said today, or you think would be a benefit to small businesses or to those who try to help small businesses, reach out to someone in the technical subcommittee, myself, Donovan, or whoever that future person might be.
Okay.
And it will, we would welcome anyone who has your level of expertise to share that knowledge.
Okay. Where the rubber hits the road is really truly going to be when the standards that are starting to incorporate 1BP go in. like that question that was raised on dry cleaning. To be honest, I don't know. I just heard that there wasn't a lot in dry cleaning. Yeah, that article, I think I read that very article. But if you hear of uses, don't assume I already know about them, or don't assume I've heard the question. I don't mind hearing a question 10 times if it makes sure that we get the answer for it.
Well, thank you. Thank you very
Yep.
much.
All right, I'm signing off, but if you need me, I'm out here, miller.susan